We just had a little bit of a conversation about, the squad. I think that a lot of people are very heartened, myself included, about the way that they have directly challenged Biden in the context of this conflict as compared to some of the other ongoing disputes of a policy nature on the left. But all of that got undermined somewhat today. I'm going to share this screen.
The squad. Y'all still call it that?
It does have a, what do you call them, Virgil?
I call them geeks, call them nerds, call them gamers.
Yeah, they're the progressive. They're the progressive bloc.
All right. Well, the squad enables Pelosi's massive Capitol Police spending bill while cynically feigning opposition. This was from Glenn Greenwald's Substack. What he's pointing out is that they voted for this massive $1.9 billion increase to Capitol Police spending, and they voted present. They didn't vote for it, but they voted present instead of voting against it. If any one of them had voted against it, it would have stopped it.
Passed by one vote. One vote in the House. Every Republican voted against it for, partisan bullshit reasons. Whatever, ignore them.
So what do we make of this?
I do want to clear.
It's a strategic. I think it's a strategic way of having the bloc, having that block of people essentially voice their concern, voice their power. The sort of like the fact that like on these narrow votes that they have some significant amount of power while still allowing it to go through. So I think it's like strategic in terms of like having a loaded gun to point and then not pulling the trigger, but making it clear that the ability to pull the trigger existed.
It's hard to argue with. What were you going to say, Virgil?
I want to note that I believe Ilhan Omar, Cori Bush, and Ayanna Pressley all voted no on the bill as opposed to just voting present. I don't think any of this is indicative of any kind of, comprehensive strategy.
Say those names again. It was Cori Bush, Ilhan Omar,
I believe. Well, I mean, this is live, so I believe.
Do you want to take a second to check it? Because I'm really interested to know. Because to Chelsea's point, like if they are taking individualized takes on these kinds of things, I will stop referring to them as a squad. They have said they are not going to vote as a bloc, and I want to give credit where credit's due and not diminish whatever acts of integrity come out of this by grouping them together unfairly. So yeah, I want to know.
I think that they're all in communication with each other far more than the other groups, but and they don't always agree strategically. But I think on this point they did. My guess, and this is I have no direct information to vouch for this or confirm this is true. This is my assessment. Is that my best guess is that in this particular instance, they had some level of communication with each other, and they made the judgment call like, how do we do this without doing it and causing the backlash of the larger aspect. So I think that they did. I think that they did count things and voted with and basically took straws in terms of like who was going to be the president versus who was going to be the vote. I think that was.
So you think they're kind of sharing the harm the way that sometimes it's Kirsten Sinema's fault, sometimes it's the parliamentarians' fault.
Yeah, they're doing the same thing they're doing the same thing that like Joe Manchin does, right? Like on the like other side in the Senate, right? In terms of like being the person who like lets the policy go through, but like makes it clear like I am the person that you need to come to me in order to get your votes, right?
Well, this is an article. Someone pointed out that AOC was frustrated with Tulsi Gabbard.
I'm gonna disagree with some of the people in chat because I think the chat is very aggressive and assertive and mean about some of these people, and like they do have strategies, and they do have a lot of I mean these are very smart people. These are incredibly smart people.
Well, to the point that. Sorry, go ahead, Virgil.
So you're saying it's a bit like the way Tom DeLay ran the House in the 2000s, which was, we don't care what the margin of a win is. We just care about the win. So that's how they managed to pass the Bush tax cuts by one vote. They managed to pass Medicare reforms by 1-2 votes, because they could let a number of legislators who were in vulnerable seats vote against the legislation they wanted to pass. All they cared about was getting to that magic number. You're saying that you think that there is a actual strategy among these left politicians that, okay, like kind of an inverse strategy that, okay, some of us are going to vote no and some of us are going to vote yes, but ultimately we want it to pass.
Yeah, I would say so.
Well, that's a problem. I mean, if they believe what they say they do about funding the police, then that's at odds with this. I mean, a lot of them have been on this 1/6 kind of streak where they're very deeply invested in it, and they seem very personally scarred by it by reasons that I understand emotionally, but is like very much out of sync with their broader ideological project.
Right, but they'll get removed otherwise. They'll just get removed. Like, and that's the question is, do you want them in? Do you want them to still continue to have voting power at all, and any kind of like power?
What do you mean by getting removed? Do you think that they're going to be stripped of their committee appointments if they don't vote for the 1/6 funding?
Yes.
And then what?
I don't think so. I don't think
they have enough. They have enough oppo against all of them to just have them removed at this point.
And then what?
And then what? I mean,
and then what?
And then
what's that headline?
What's that headline? I mean, they all get removed for, I don't know, for violating national security, for being terrorists, for being...
No, look, Marjorie, first of all, if Nancy Pelosi wants to accuse AOC, who had this harrowing bathroom experience where she was almost massacred for not caring enough, for not being invested enough in this because she didn't vote for an increase in military funding. If Nancy Pelosi wants to take that argument to the media, Nancy Pelosi, who only 25% of Americans actually support, and rile against this charming, photogenic young congresswoman who has up until this point been widely supportive of holding people accountable for 1/6, and said that because she didn't vote for this one police funding bill that she's un-American. I think that if AOC and the squad were smart, they'd take that fight on and let Nancy Pelosi try to make that case.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think they'd win.
You think that Nancy Pelosi is going to win the public relations battle against AOC, who outstrips, and the rest of the squad who outstrip her favorability wise by multiple factors?
Yeah, I think so.
And so what does that look like? Now AOC is effectively Marjorie Taylor Greene, who I would remind you commands a lot of headlines, an enormous amount of funding capacity, and is in no danger of losing her. Well, I actually don't know that. I won't get that far, but AOC certainly is in no danger of losing her seat. Okay, well, I just don't know.
I think the difference is that the right leans into the far, the fringe is like popular on the right, whereas like the establishment and the powers that be, they chastise and they eliminate and they sort of like move as they try to prevent like it's slipping further to the left at all. Like there's no the progressive wing is viewed as an existential threat, as opposed to like the right, which is like, hey, yeah, let's go, like,
okay, but that's a choice. That's because of their behavior. So if AOC decides to capitulate to Nancy Pelosi, she doesn't have any power anyway. She's got to do whatever Nancy Pelosi says. If AOC decides to stand up to Nancy Pelosi the way that Marjorie Taylor Greene or the Tea Party Republicans have stood up to the Republican establishment, history has shown that that's an actual effective strategy that gets people actually kicked out of Congress, and that these Tea Party candidates managed to run and win. Now, it's not an exact analogy. Tea Party candidates are funded by Koch brother big dollars in a way that these progressive candidates aren't, but the progressive candidates also have unprecedented fundraising power and actually don't need these corporate donations to run and win, and haven't used them forever. Their power lies exactly in the very people that they're turning their backs on and doing things like voting for these police funding bills for a Capitol riot that threatened no one but them. So either they choose having no power with Nancy Pelosi, or using what power they do have with the people and independent donations. And I, for the life of me, can't understand how they benefit, and going along and being corporate Democrats along with Nancy Pelosi.
I wouldn't call them corporate Democrats, but certainly, here's the thing, you're in a position where you have no power. You have your junior members of Congress, right? And you are trying to gain more support and more power. And the only way that you can do that is within the confines of the construction of power that exist. The only way that you can do that is to hold on to your seat long enough in order for you to A, move, to
But
wait for more
their
votes
seats aren't in jeopardy. The only way the AOC
their seats aren't in jeopardy, but their positions are in jeopardy because they have the sort of they can be removed at the pleasure of the
from committee appointments. So
Yeah.
AOC and them
not just committee appointments. They could be stripped of being a member of Congress, and they have the votes to do that.
I don't know if Congress has the votes to kick AOC out of Congress.
Yeah, because you have every Republican vote, and then you only need like 20 or 30.
I don't know if you would have every Republican vote, because it would be such a look. I'm not saying that precedent means anything, but I'm saying this would be a big radical change, and if they were to do something like that to someone like AOC, it would create
beloved.
Beloved. Yeah, it would.
A Latina, a young woman, beautiful.
An irreparable rift
That's
in
not happening.
the Democratic Party, where the current strategy for people like Pelosi and Biden is we want to increase the legitimacy of our current system.
Being
we want to bring people like AOC into the fold, and we want to defang them.
Sorry. Being popular has nothing to do with any of this. Like, you can be super popular and still be annihilated.
Because
absolutely annihilated.
AOC does not need Nancy Pelosi or the DNC's money to win a re-election. AOC already had an enormous amount of money spent against her.
The only way that she can get committee seats or have anything to do.
In AOC's primary race this year, in AOC's general election race this year, more money was spent to try to unseat AOC than in any other congressional race in America this year, if I'm recalling this correctly. Correct. She has already got the knives at her back, and she won handily because, one, she can out fundraise anybody because she has the credibility of the people for now. And she does not need them, which is her power. My only point, Chelsea, is that her power comes from the people. It's never going to be by voting along with Nancy Pelosi. So she can vote along with Nancy Pelosi and have an easy path and effectively be Nancy Pelosi. And then I don't feel like I have any commitment or need to support her. And that is the choice that she as an independent person is allowed to have. Or alternatively, she can try to do what the heck she went to Congress to do and take oppositional adversarial stances, be willing to be a one-term congresswoman, as she said she was okay with. Although I don't think that's even on the table because, again, she's unseatable. She's unseatable. So the only consequence is losing a committee appointment. Let's talk about committee seats. There was a lot made of committee seats in January about how, we're going to play the game. We're not going to vote against Nancy Pelosi because we're going to get these committee seats. She didn't end up getting them anyway. And every squad member basically got exactly what they got the last time around. Nobody got anything more. And Katie Porter got less for playing the game. So what exactly are we so afraid of everybody losing at this point?
I think that losing seats and losing credibility in sort of the media game is I think that could be a much more
where they're losing credibility with the left, so they have to make a choice. And maybe it doesn't matter. I think so. I absolutely think so. And AOC has enough ability to fundraise from neoliberals that maybe she doesn't care, and good luck to her. And that's a choice. But the reason I was so enthusiastic about AOC is because she didn't care about that. And she really spoke to the values that I believe in. And I hope that AOC recognizes that is where a lot of power lies. Her power was in going to Nancy Pelosi's office and challenging her on her first day in office with the Green New Deal kids. And that was that ability to have the media at her back, these kids at her back, the support of all of these people that are on the right side of history against a curmudgeonly corporatist like Nancy Pelosi. That's the kind of imagery that has made AOC who she is today. And that goodwill is not going to last forever if she doesn't redouble those efforts and keep it up,
Yeah, I'm very confused. I'm sorry.
It's no worries. I want to look who burns. It's just the latest example of lefties clinging too stubbornly to strategy, to my mind. In this case, hanging too hard to caution.
No,
okay. So on that point, the here's the thing, like strategy is long term, which means that you're not always thinking of what this particular, and so you're not always thinking of what you're doing in the 1 or 2 moves ahead, that you're doing now. You're thinking 6, 7 moves ahead, right? At least if you're a chess player, right? And I think that I do think that they're smart. I think they have a strategy. I think they have a long-term strategy. Does it matter? Now the question is, does that long-term strategy matter? And that is, I think, that is a much.
What
more
do you imagine it would
question.
be, Chelsea? You're so smart, and you have in many instances during our long conversation now anticipated what the strategy might be with respect to Israel Palestine, with respect to this alien stuff. What do you imagine the long-term strategy would be that would justify the pattern of behavior that we've seen from the squad, from progressive members of Congress this year?
I would say that the strategy here is to hold the number of seats that you have, try to gain as many people on the sort of left as possible, focusing on a lot of supporting primaries, right? And having other organizations like the Justice Democrats do, like support those primaries, support candidates in these in these smaller seats, in these House seats, so and whatnot, and try to not lose the ground that you've gained. Because what has happened historically, if you look at the 1910s, 1920s, for instance, is progressive blocs got wiped out through removal votes, even though despite how popular they were. The only reason that we have the two party system that we have, both parties are deeply unpopular except for within the extremes of their fan base, right? And the only way because the only way that you can actually play the game within the political establishment that you have is not based upon your popularity. It doesn't matter how popular you are, because the system itself isn't popular. Nobody likes this stuff. It's built differently.
Look, I until someone can explain to me what the benefit of progressives being in Congress is, you cannot.
Different. I don't think
but Chelsea, let me just finish.
I think it's a different debate, and I think that's a much more worthy debate.
No, this is the debate. This is the debate, because the debate we're having is whether or not it's worth them to compromise and do things like vote for increased police spending when they just spent a year talking about Black Lives Matter and why we need to have this conversation and defund the police and all of these kinds of things. The argument, the discussion that we're having here is when it is the big boy pant thing to do to compromise. It's the grown-up thing. This is what a lot of the people in the DSA, Jacobin Circuit have been arguing, that there's a bigger project here that we just don't understand, and all the big brain geniuses get it. Okay, well, for one, I would like them to articulate to me, what is the benefit of having these people in Congress if in every instance they're going to vote along with the corporate Democrats? If your argument is that 50 years from now, there will be enough progressives in Congress that all of a sudden they can wake up en masse and say, we don't have to vote with the corporatists anymore, we're the majority, and take over. I would like to point you to a clip from 30 years ago when Nancy Pelosi was the AOC, the youngest woman ever to be elected to Congress, standing out at a podium talking about how we need Medicare for all in the United States of America. Because that's not how it works. The longer you're in Congress, it doesn't make you more progressive. Okay.
Right. I think that's a better debate to have. I think it's much more constructive in terms of the I think it gets more to the root of things is whether or not being involved in congressional politics is what you're after. And I think that is a much more.
So that's the question. So then any comment that's oh, well, they might not keep their seats. Oh, they might lose power. They might lose committee.
They will. I mean, they will lose power.
Okay. I don't think that's true. But even
if it's 100% true.
Even if it were true, the point is, if with that power and with those committee appointments, they can't get anything done. We had David Dayen on the podcast talking about how Katie Porter, who is one of the most effective legislators in Congress, who has won as a hippy dippy liberal and a solidly was able to flip a red seat blue despite being all socialisty in nature. I mean, she's not, but Medicare for all supporting person, has not been able to get a single bill through committee.
Yeah.
And then this time around, we talked at length about how she was in a kind of unprecedented way denied a position on the Financial Services Committee, basically because Maxine Waters didn't want her there because she and her whiteboard were taking too much of her shine.
Anyway, it's a committee for, let the freshmen
paper play
go on the committee so that they can soak up the campaign donations from financial interests, because that's what they're there for.
Yeah.
Well,
why it exists.
I mean, unfortunately, the Congress's other role isn't just to legislate; it's also to like be sort of the representative in terms of like interfacing with government and conducting investigations and doing all of these other things and the more boring parts, right? Which I mean, like 90% of being a member of Congress should, in theory, be doing that part, even though it's 70% of the time it's actually fundraising for your next campaign.
Yes, which is the Financial Services Committee. I mean, part of what David Dan was explaining was that that's a committee where you liaise with the financial services industry, and both parties, it's a huge committee because both parties want as many members as possible to be engaged there so that they can fundraise. And Katie Porter talking about a wealth tax is not going to get those dollar bills from JP Morgan Chase. Raphael, they have power because they have a base of people who they don't really tap into to transform local government, running people to replace dogmatic reactionary established candidates. Thank you for that, Raphael.
I think it's a logistics game. You know, you only have so much logistics and you only have so much power and you only have so much public support. And that's a public support can be rapidly eroded. I mean, it can be eroded with one news story.
And isn't that true? Why is that a conversation? Thank you, Kofi. Why is that a conversation that is only had about progressives? Because and never had about Nancy Pelosi. No, I'm not talking about the right. The right is not. I'm not talking about right left. I'm talking about people like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer versus people like AOC and Ilhan Omar. The idea
they are the right.
No, but that's not what I'm saying, Chelsea. The idea that negative press only affects the squad.
Right.
Positive press can never touch them, and Nancy Pelosi will always win that media battle. We just had Donald Trump elected to be president of the United States of America with negative press, not only from the liberal media, nonstop. He's a fascist, blah, blah, blah. He's corrupt. He molested his daughter, everything in the world on the mainstream liberal media. No favors done. Also, the Republicans didn't even like him. And he was an outlier in his own party. And eventually they coalesced, but it was not until the primary season was well over and there was plenty of anti-Trump stuff happening on the right wing too. And guess what? This man not only beat up like 17 other Republicans to become the Republican nominee, he became the president of the United States of America. Is going to run in 4 years and might do a coup. It might be a supreme leader for the rest of all time. So, you know, the man's going to live forever, too, because he's been eating that McDonald's and his insides are perfectly preserved.
Yeah, I thought he was going to die 1-2 years ago. The fact that he's still alive.
He survived COVID.
I mean, no, he's going to be with us as long as Kissinger, who is still alive.
He's still alive. So my only point is that...
Trump well into when we're in our 60s. Yeah.
My only point is that, yes, bad media is going to happen. Saying the words bad media is not an argument. That is their starting point for figuring out how you're going to manage that media and persevere regardless. If you stop in your tracks every time you think, oh, this is going to generate a bad media story, you are, and you obviously are not, Chelsea, so I'm obviously meaning omniscient.
I don't care.
That is a cowardly position that is going to get shit else done. You are going to accomplish exactly nothing. The media was overwhelmingly against Martin Luther King. He got negative news stories in the New York Times and every other liberal press against him every single day of the week.
Can I speak from my personal experience a bit
sure,
here?
Of course.
And just as a slight defense is that one of the things that I had to learn when I was in prison was to pick my battles, right?
Sure.
And sometimes that meant going along with the herd in order to execute a more long-term strategy of surviving to get to the other side.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, this is it's not, I'm not saying that it's what's right and what's wrong. It's more even somebody like me who does a lot of hard stuff, right? That hard, extremely hard stuff that matters is 2%, and 98% of that period of time is me going through the motions of going through a court-martial process, of me going through the motions of raising money for my legal defense, of going through with survival. I had to go through the system, even parts of the system that I didn't agree with, in order to get through to the other side. Now, whether or not that's applicable to electoral politics or to parliamentary procedures and whatnot is, I think, a different debate. But I do think that that sort of in terms of having a strategic mindset, sometimes not doing something gives you more power than doing everything.
Well, I would say this. It was a slow burn. I certainly wasn't, oh my gosh, AOC doesn't support force the vote, so let's kick her out of Congress or whatever. It was when AOC started saying that she was reserving her energy around the vote for Nancy Pelosi in order to fight for a $15 minimum wage, which people would be hard pressed to argue is not
I would argue
the thing
different.
to fight for.
When was that? When was that stuff? Was it January 4th?
Yeah, the Pelosi vote was January 3rd.
Yeah, I think she was more worried about her own personal safety around that time. Personally,
well, the 1/6 hadn't happened yet, so that was a non-issue.
It was already in like they were.
But regardless, Chelsea, that's not the point. The point is that even if you believed it, even if personal safety, whatever, I concede all of that. Who cares? The point is, she said she was preserving her quote political capital for the fight for 15. Okay, so when all right, let's reserve judgment and wait to see what happens around the fight.
Neo-lib, apparently, according to chat. So.
No, ignore the chat. This is why you tell me that I'm wrong to not pay attention to the chat. I believe that good mental health, for me personally, comes from being very selective about which one of these charming young patrons I actually read.
I've totally sold out to the national security apparatus. I'm totally a surveillance liberal. And I like these people. I like Alex. But I'm not going to fight her over a lot of this stuff. Like,
well, look, if I could just wrap this up.
I'm not even trying to be like hard to I think people are like taking this as like, oh, I'm a lib, right? I'm a lib.
Just ignore them, Chelsea. Funny. Look, let me just wrap this up. The point is that if the credibility crisis really came when she explicitly said, I'm saving this for fight for 15, and then didn't use the leverage that she had at the time to hold up the must-pass COVID bill to make sure that it had just one permanent piece of legislation in it. Permanent one. That would be, I want to remind everybody again, and go tell your grandparents and your uncles and aunties who are listening to this, that this is the longest period without a minimum wage raise in American history since we got a minimum wage in 1938. And with all of that history in need in the middle of an economic crisis and a COVID pandemic behind you, to not be willing to take a stand and say, you're not going to pass this bill without the bare minimum of $15 living wage for all of these people who have been called heroes for the past year, and you won't even pay them a living wage. That was the fight. That was the Rubicon not to cross. That was the hill to die on.
Right.
And you explicitly said that was the hill you were willing to die on 3 months prior, and you didn't do it. That's why people are angry. That's why there's a credibility crisis.
Who's angry? I don't understand.
A lot of people on the
I haven't encountered a lot of this. I haven't seen it.
Well, trust me, it's out there. Stay human. Thank you. There's only one party, the party of imperialism and empire.
I mean, a lot of this stuff, like I only heard about like in like January. It was like end of December, beginning of January, and I just never heard about it again.
RJ Raymond, if removal from Congress is a legit threat, then electoral politics is an even bigger dead end than we already thought. And a massive nationwide Occupy level campaign of strikes and civil disobedience is more crucial than ever. Thank you, RJ. $20. It's a big one, so I'm reading it.
Thank you very much. I don't think anyone here has the inside track on what Reps Bush, Tlaib, Omar, Ocasio-Cortez, Presley are doing. I would love if we could get someone who was
I have a lot of sense of what's going on there, but I'm
share with us, please, because we had Susan Sarandon on the podcast Thursday. And we asked her specifically about this because she was one of these people who campaigned for AOC before anyone knew who she was. And there were all these cell phone videos of her in living rooms. And she said, look, she can't get a line to AOC. She, like Ralph Nader, can't get her on the phone. And this is not what she thought she was campaigning for. Now, AOC doesn't owe Susan Sarandon anything. And Susan Sarandon said that, obviously. But there was a gap between what she ran on and how she represented.
I just want to acknowledge because chat. I acknowledge chat's angry. Apparently, chat's angry, so I want to acknowledge that. Sorry.
That's angry.
That it's the gap, the misrepresentation gap. People aren't randomly saying, "Oh, I wish AOC would, do deep sea fishing for me on a live chat," like something completely attenuated from what she's ever claimed to be. No, people are simply trying to hold her to what she campaigned on, the same way we talked about with Joe Biden earlier in this stream.